increasingly extreme and frequent hurricanes, and the rising costs of repair, and frankly, insurance, also a thing I didn't think I'd have to worry about at 17. I have to admit that for most of my childhood, the industrial development that mars the beautiful landscape of Louisiana just blurred into the background. I barely even saw it. It was so ever present. And now it's all that I can see. And about 10 years ago, I suddenly saw another problem that is now, that used to be invisible to me, but now that I can't unsee. And that is the problem of plastics. And once my eyes were open to that problem, it didn't take long before you start to look upstream to the origin of the problem and where it comes from, to the footprint of oil, gas, and chemical extraction that is on the footprint of agricultural and labor exploitation and extraction and oppression that is hurting the place that I love so much and that so many of you also love so much. There are many of you here, similar to me, who actually were able to find a professional home at an international organization. For me, that is the Center for International Environmental Law, which has been working since 1989. I mean, not me personally, I was a child in 1989, but the organization has been working since 1989 at the convergence of human rights, the environment, and the law, specifically through the lens of climate change. And one of the driving observations of that work is that the ongoing climate policy and negotiations are not moving at anywhere near the necessary speed. And sometimes our approach is actually headed in completely the wrong direction. I got to CL through my work on plastics, locally through a local organization that I helped found called No Waste Louisiana, but also globally through the Break Free from Plastics movement. That is due in no small part to the advocacy and coalition building that we have been doing at CL. And I think this clicker is going to work. Aha, I was supposed to do that already. I'm going to walk you through a couple of pictures right now. In this top left corner, this is actually a picture of celebration from the UN Environment Assembly earlier this year, because I've got good news for you if you didn't know already. We're going to be negotiating a new global treaty on plastics, y'all. It's very exciting. That is years of work. Just 2 years ago, nobody thought that was possible. And now we are going to have a treaty on plastics alongside a treaty on climate. And that is so important for the work that we are doing on petrochemicals. That's actually my boss, David Azoulay, celebrating in the far right of that first picture there. And you can't really see it because it actually got covered up in the way these pictures are here, but my forearm is also in the front of that photo. CL's work also takes some of us deep into historical archives and financial databases, where we actually get to produce some pretty hard-hitting analyses on all the facets of industrial exploitation that are driving the climate crisis. And often our work also takes us out into the street. You might recognize some people in this lineup in the bottom photo. That's my tall self all the way in the back. But in the front, we also have Miss Sharon Levine, who reminded us yesterday that as long as she's around in Louisiana, these companies are not coming here, which is amazing. Increasingly, CL's work has actually been moving us into a new space, which is litigation. I mean, not for me. I'm not a lawyer, thank God. I mean, I'm sure lawyers are fine. I'm sure there's many of you in this room. You're lovely people. But some of my wonderful colleagues are confronting head-on the companies and entities who have caused the climate crisis, and we are working to hold them accountable for the harms that they have been reaping in our communities. CL's collective expertise has actually been in exposing what fossil fuel companies knew about the harms they were causing, when they knew it, and what they did to misinform the public and our policymakers about it. I mentioned the Break Free from Plastics movement, which is the global movement that trained me up and made my global work possible, even from my home in New Orleans. CL's foundation is collaborative movement work like that, with partners large and small that are confronting the expansion of oil and gas in the Gulf South and around the world. And as we do that, and as climate negotiations do progress, even at a snail's pace, and as we are building toward the negotiations of the new plastics treaty, we have to be keenly aware of how we strategize against the escape hatches that this industry is building for itself. Namely, that is carbon capture and storage, petrochemicals like plastics, and fossil fertilizers. I can't tell you how heartening it was to hear Mr. Gore speak yesterday against the smoke and mirrors of the carbon capture and storage fake solution, and to hear that there are farm workers, yes, and to hear that there are farm workers on the front line that are already seeing these connections. A lot of our work is already moving parallel in different pockets, and we have to bring it together. Our communities in the Gulf South are at the forefront of climate change in more ways than one. We have felt the health impacts of not only the changing climate, but also the fossil fuel pollution that got us there. We are acutely aware of the consistent and pervasive erosion of our human rights, of the racism that is inherent in the build-out of this infrastructure. And we have to be fighting against it, and I am incredibly heartened to be here with all of you on the front line doing exactly that. 3 generations of my family still live in the house that I grew up in Baton Rouge. My birthday is actually next Friday. Thank you. And I am extremely grateful that I can take a short ride with my family, a short drive to my hometown, and spend it around the table with my siblings. I have for most of my life been tattooing the symbols of Louisiana onto my body. The cypress with its roots deep in the swamp, and the mighty pelican spreading its wings over the water, the magnolia that unflowers every spring. And I do this because I love this place. I love it, and I know that we have a future here, and I know it is worth protecting, and it is worth fighting for and commemorating. And I'll close out with a quote from Lilla Watson, who's an Indigenous Australian advocate. Some of you may know of her and of this quote that has always stuck with me. She says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." As Reverend Yearwood reminded us yesterday, quoting the late, great Fannie Lou Hamer, none of us are free from the threat of climate change and the threat of extraction and harm until all of us are free. So y'all, let's get free because we deserve better. Thank you. Today, we will be doing a lot of moving, both literally in and out of different workshop spaces, but also figuratively as we take on the information that we learned yesterday and talk about real actions and how to get on the other side of it. We're going to be doing skill building, capacity building, coalition building, strategizing, networking. Y'all thought it was an easy Friday. Surprise! We're also here to strengthen the fight against the fossil fuel industry in the Gulf South, so let us get to it. So this beautiful Friday starts with a panel that is focused on what the future could hold for a Gulf South where communities are put before profits, where a just transition is built and achieved, and where investments are made to safeguard people and nature, not to exploit people and nature. So I am very excited to introduce your panel of experts today. First, we have Susana Almanza, Director and Organizer of People Organized in Defense of Earth and Her Resources. Also known as PODER, Susana is also a White House Environmental Justice Committee member. We have Armon Alex, Co-Executive Director of the Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit. He's also a climate reality leader trained in Las Vegas this year. My dear friend, Logan Burke, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy. And, of course, Abre Connor, the Director of Environmental and Climate Justice at the NAACP. Welcome, panelists. And I'm now very happy to hand over the microphone to Vice President Al Gore, who's going to moderate this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you for serving as our MC today. Welcome to all 4 of you. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good evening. I want to thank Reverend Manning, who is here, for a wonderful message. There was a small prayer breakfast this morning, and appreciated that. I feel like I had a healthy, nutritious, spiritual meal. I really appreciate that so much, and all the faith leaders that came. So here we are, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because each of you is a leader in your respective communities, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I want to start with a kind of a general question, and that is if you would share with this group something about your journey toward activism in the EJCJ cause, and we'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll mix it up a little bit and have some follow-up questions. Tell us about your journey.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I'm Susana Almanza, and as a child, I grew up in poverty. I attended segregated schools, lived in segregated economies in the urban segregated city of Austin, Texas. My parents, my mother had a garden, and we grew vegetables, and we had chickens, and during the season, rabbits and deer, and she cooked everything fresh. Also, my mother was a healer, so she was very much in tune with nature and what it offered. And so, as a child, I got to experience all the creeks. That's when the creeks had water, and they were safe to be in also. And also, we knew about all the seasons and what seasons produce what fruits. It's all of these life experiences that have led me into the environmental justice movement, because the environmental justice movement is where we live, work, play, learn, and pray. And the environmental justice movement is the understanding that nature kind and humankind are interwoven, interlocked, and cannot be separated. And that is why I am now in the environmental justice movement, because it is a movement that is inclusive of people of color and people of color at the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. wonderfully said. Thank you. Armon, tell us about your story and your journey.
Well, likewise, I'm very thankful to be here. Thanks for having young people at the table too. My name's Armon Alex. Howdy, everyone. Good morning. I'm from Corpus Christi, Texas, born and raised. My family have been of these lands for the past 40 years. My grandmother immigrated here illegally from Mexico sometime back in the 1960s, and our family has been here ever since. I mentioned I was from Corpus Christi, Texas, which is relevant because it is a coastal community right by the Gulf of Mexico. We have the Corpus Christi Bay, which is in our backyard, and we say our big neighbor is the big Gulf. And you know, I think a lot of the frontline communities in the world, some of us that are fighting for this climate justice, you know, we don't necessarily have a choice. For a lot of us, it's a matter of survival. Growing up along the coast, when I was little, I love to share this story about my father. My parents had split when I was much younger, and so my father, when he would come to visit from Dallas, we'd go by the bays, maybe about the age of 6 or 7, and one of my first connections to our waters and our environment was just going up and down the bays and the beaches collecting seashells with my father. And my father was an interesting guy, and I'll probably speak about him a little bit more during the rest of the time, but he was someone that I looked up to. And I remember him specifically always liking the seashells that always had a story to tell, he would say. The ones that were beaten up, maybe had holes in them, barnacles, algae, whatever. But me being so little and tiny little Armon, I loved the ones that were brand new, that looked shiny, like if they had just gotten them out of the store, to be honest. And before my father had passed away in my senior year of high school, he said to me, "Do you remember when I would take you down to the beaches and the bays when you were little?" And I go, "Yeah, absolutely, I remember that." And he goes, "Well, one thing that I remembered you doing when you were so young at the age of 6 or 7 was going out of your way to find those beaten shells just for me so that we could stay at the beach a little bit longer." And he goes, "That was something that I admired of you so much, was your compassion for others and your willingness to put others' needs before your own." And I think that is at the heart of this environmental justice movement. For me, at least, I can only speak from my experiences. We have to be compassionate of each other. And I mentioned earlier that it's a matter of survival, and certainly for frontline communities, we are doing this work so that we can make sure we're compassionate to the generations that come after us and our family and our friends. But yeah, that's why I'm doing this work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well said. I appreciate that very much. Logan, tell us about your journey.
Sure. So I am of the Gulf South. I was born in Miami, was raised up in Alabama by a family of Houstonians, and I now live in Louisiana. But as a kid, I gotta be honest, I was not proud to be from the South. In fact, coming from a small town where I didn't agree with a lot of the social injustices that I saw around me, I was afraid of even saying that I was proud to be from the South. And so as an 18-year-old, I thought all of these harms are too much for me to handle. The way for me to fix it is to go where everybody already agrees with me, which was really silly. But as an 18-year-old, that's what I did. And so I thought I'd never live in the South again. And then after 14 years, I came back and I said, oh, no, this place is worth protecting. And I said, well, okay, now that I'm deeply in love with the South again, realizing the richness of the culture and the people and the land, what can I do to protect its future? And so I started looking around for organizations that were working on solutions. And I found one that had a long history in environmental justice and economic justice. And I said, how can I help, what can I do to recommit myself to this place that I want to see my own future in? And was really fortunate to find a home in doing climate justice and economic justice, working on energy burdens and reducing energy costs. Because when it comes down to it, so many of the threats that so many of us are experiencing, both right now and in the future, come down to energy issues. If you can't pay your utility bill, that's right now, that's knocking at your door. But if you don't know that you'll be able to raise your family in the house you grew up in, that's your future. And so I started working deep into this energy space. What I didn't know is that I would find a family of people, and so many of them are here in this room. It's kind of overwhelming to know how much love and how much family is here working together in all of this. So now that I've found this family, and now that I've fallen in love with the South again, I'm not going anywhere.
Good for you. Thank you. Thank you. Abre Connor, tell us your story.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having us. I'm originally from Lakeland, Florida, which is in the central part of Florida, and I grew up having a number of breathing problems. I didn't actually understand at that point that it was likely because of where I lived, being in a community that was disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards, environmental harms. I understood that being a Black girl in the South, being a Black girl in Florida, that I was facing a number of injustices because of where I lived. And I knew that I wanted to do civil rights work in some type of way. But it didn't occur to me until I got to college, and then when I decided to go to law school, because I was like, well, we just need to fix the laws. Like it'll be really easy, and then we can have equity for everyone. That there was an environmental component to civil rights work, and that in order for us to even think about our Constitution, in order for us to even think about civil rights, we had to center environmental issues within every single component of that. And so for me, it was personal because, number one, I didn't necessarily even know if I wanted to go to law school. I just knew that I wanted to fix the issues that I saw myself, that I saw other Black folks and people of color facing across the South, but understanding that my very being was being impacted because of decisions from individuals who weren't necessarily centering me, centering my family, centering my friends in their decisions, was one of the reasons why I felt like it was really important to continue on this journey, to think about environmental justice, to think about climate justice. And it's just overwhelming to think about where things were in the past, the conversations that we were having on smaller scales about environmental justice, trying to really amplify the conversations into now be in a space like this with so many individuals who are committed to ensuring that we have a better future. And so that's why I do it, that's why I started in this work, and that's why I continue to do this work with NAACP.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much. 4 very interesting life experiences and 4 very interesting journeys and stories. Thank you. Let me ask all 4 of you now, tell us about the significance of the Gulf South, those of you who have a connection here, and what your vision for the future of the Gulf South is, and how does advocacy work fit into it? What does the just transition mean to you? Whoever would like to go first, jump in.
Everybody's looking at me, I guess. Please forgive me, I am going to use some notes because this is just too important to not really nail. So from what I can tell, for lots of different reasons, the Gulf South is the center of the climate justice movement in the US. And unfortunately, we've been written off as a lost cause, or too hard to fight in, which is, I think, a real shame. And this shows up in lots of ways. So for example, you might be aware that in 2020, 1% of environmental philanthropy went to the Gulf South, 1%. And 1% of that 1% went to energy, or clean energy and climate. So that suggests to me that investment, not just in terms of politics, which is a whole nother thing, but investment in terms of saying, we have to win and we have to give people on the ground the support they need to win, has largely been ignored or been, lots of people have just said, well, that's just going to have to be the sacrifice zone. And I cannot, I cannot handle that. I refuse to say that that's okay. Similarly, just as when I was 18, I thought it was too hard to fight the political fights here, it's time for the rest of our country and the political thinkers and political leaders and analysts to grow up and come here and start working here. So I think many of the other problems are that those who seem to be benefiting from all of this extraction are not acknowledging that what they're getting is not enough. Meaning, everybody's well-being is wrapped up in everybody else's safety and security. And no one is benefiting enough from what's happening right now to say it's okay for climate change to take our land, to take our future. It's simply not okay. And so a vision has to start with dignity for everyone. And it has to be fueled by more people who insist that we all deserve that dignity. What is incredibly inspiring to me is that young people have way more fire in their belly than I ever did. And so it's exciting to be in a room of young people and sitting and fighting alongside young people who see themselves in this fight. And not only that, are encouraging those around them to see themselves in this fight. I think that's a huge part of it. Because I think the fossil and petrochemical industry for so long has done a great job at using the words of community and neighbor. But we've got to take that back. And we've got to redefine what it means to be a community, what we know it means to be a community, and help others who might not already be in this fight to understand that you can be an activist just by talking about this at the dinner table, just by a show of example, what you buy and how you treat people, and voting and bringing your people along with you. And I think for a vision, in the energy space, we talk a lot about distributed energy, We talk about solar and storage and energy efficiency and things in people's homes. And I like to think about distributed people power, which means everybody seeing a little bit of themselves in this activism and thinking more expansively about what it means to be an activist. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Well said. Thank you. I want to pause just for a minute on that phrase we've all heard, sacrifice zone. Sacrifice zone. It's very interesting to think about it. It's enraging to think about it. But it should be understood in the context of environmental justice and climate justice. Because if we don't have fundamental change, they're about to make the entire Earth a sacrifice zone.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm serious about that. I mean, if you look at what the scientists tell us would happen if we did not change course, we're in the midst of beginning to change course. So understand, there's hope out there. We're gonna win this, but there are going to be some losses in the process. But if we did not change, they would be content, I think, to just let the whole planet be a sacrifice zone. And another way to turn that around and look at it through the other end is, if we had paid more attention in decades past to what was inflicted upon communities of color and poor communities that did not have, that had been deprived of the same ability economically and politically to protect themselves against the placement of polluting facilities, if we had paid more attention to what was going on, we could have begun the work of remedying this crisis a long time ago. But this is not here. I'm not here to talk, I guess. Who wants to go next?
I think that's a good segue, Gore, from what you said, because in order to achieve climate and environmental justice, we must confront structural racism.
Absolutely.
There can be no climate or environmental justice without addressing racial, what's happening in the racial structure. And so to me, that's very important. And we know that in the Gulf South, we have experienced the worst effects of climate change, whether it's the rise of temperatures, hurricanes, flooding, the loss of land due to the rising seas. So Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida, the Gulf South states, they are dominated by industries that are related to energy, the petrochemical, aerospace, agriculture, and tourism. But also we know that the majority of these polluting facilities are in communities of color. And in May of 2019, over 350 organizations from those Gulf South states came together and launched the Gulf South for the Green New Deal. And that was a vision. That was a true vision of the people from the Gulf South. And I want to touch just a little bit on of those visions. One was advancing equity, because we know we're not all the same accountable for climate change, nor will we feel the benefits of the effects of climate change. And we also look at following the indigenous frontline leadership. The voices and needs of the indigenous and frontline communities must be prioritized in the Green New Deal. The sovereign rights and treaties of tribal nations must be acknowledged and honored. We must build community wealth and health. For too long, workers in the Gulf South communities have been forced to false choices between a living wage and health. Jobs associated with the Green New Deal must offer living wages and prioritize sustainable practices of farming, remediating toxic soil and foresting our degraded land, transitioning our energy infrastructure to renewables like solar and wind energy, preparing vulnerable communities and land for a change in climate while caring for those in need, and investing in the next generation so that they are equipped to deal with the further changing of the planet. And another one I want to touch on, of course, there's invest, envisionary, and transformative change. But advanced community and local control, to me, is the most important. To create a just, equitable, people-centered economy, power must be shifted away from large corporations to local communities. Communities must create and control their own wealth by providing pathways for affordable housing and sustainable ownership, public control of natural resources, renewable energy sources, and utility services, unencumbered access to energy, clean water, clean air, healthy food, fair housing, livable wages, and information on human rights rooted in self-determination. And I'll touch on one of the ones is values and human equity. This country deserves an economy rooted in the dignity and self-determination of communities from the bottom up. That's what we need to go. Where are the roots? The roots are on the ground, and we are the roots, and the roots are growing, and we're growing in a movement in the Gulf South that we have come together and said, ya basta, enough is enough, and it's time to move forward because our Mother Earth is not the one in the crisis, it's humanity. Humanity is in the crisis.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's very important that we understand that.
Thank you so much. Well said. Abre and then Armon.
And I wanted to touch on something that you said, Mr. Gore, and also Susana as well, about local control and the need for communities who have faced historic disinvestment to really be centered. I spent a lot of time, especially recently, in Jackson, Mississippi, because of the water crisis there. As many of you all know, because of flooding in Jackson, Mississippi, they have now faced a water crisis that has been years in the making. For Jackson, out of the last 25 years, they only received federal funding out of 3 of those 25 years because the state has really been holding Jackson back. The governor has been utilizing everything in his power to make it nearly impossible for this Black state capital to be able to rebuild. And so when we think about local control, that is exactly what we're seeing being disinvested in Mississippi. And the individuals there, the residents there, they know that their water is not safe to drink. For years, they've been drinking bottled water. For years, they've been saying, hey, there's a problem here in Jackson. The Black mayors who have been in place have been asking for emergency declarations, have been asking for more funding. But when we think about what it is that we need now, we have this promise of Justice 40 with the Biden administration. We have more historic investments in from federal spending and federal investments than ever before at the federal level that's supposed to be reaching our communities. But unfortunately, when we have people at the state level who hold so much power to be able to weaponize these funds against our communities, then we end up in situations where we're perpetuating systemic racism in our communities because those funding streams need to go directly to the people who need to see it most. We also have to utilize our data in order to actually be advocacy tools within our communities. And so even right now, for example, the EPA, for example, has data that's available about water contaminants, pollutants, and different things that we should be able to use to demonstrate what's happening within our communities. But when you look at the indices, it only goes as far as to say communities of color. So in a place like Jackson, if I'm trying to get data about what's happening to Black folks, I can't even get that information from the EPA right now. And so we also have to utilize our collective voices to tell the federal government we need more specific data so that we can do the advocacy that we need to do on the ground. In addition to that, not only do we need data, we need technical assistance within our communities that's actually reflective of what communities need. So oftentimes you'll have communities who are saying, hey, we need operations and maintenance on our, for example, water infrastructure issues. But for example, the EPA, the technical assistance oftentimes does not fund operations and maintenance for technical assistance. And so there's this disconnect that's also happening when it comes to where we are now and where we need to be. And so, so centering communities, centering their needs, centering what they're saying is actually at the center of how we're going to create a better future, how we're going to create a better Gulf South, is how we're going to actually get to a place where we're at equity at the center of our environmental and climate justice work.
Yeah, there's so much to say about Jackson, Mississippi. I don't want to divert and really dive too deeply into it right now, but there is, as you say, a long history, and not funding the operations and maintenance was, for a long period of time, was part of the problem. And there was so-called white flight out of the city, and that left the concentration of black people to be much higher. And then there was black flight out of the city also, correct, where middle class and upper class black families were also departing. And that left a city that was pleading in vain to the state government for help, and now the crisis has hit. And there's so many places, Flint, Michigan, with the lead in the pipes, and there are hundreds and hundreds of communities that are in a similar situation. But you know, you can see opportunity in crisis. The old cliche is the Chinese write the word crisis with two symbols. The first is danger by itself. The second one is opportunity. Put them together, you get a crisis. We can create lots of great new jobs in replacing the pipes and doing the operations and maintenance, building the new plants. We've just got to make a decision as a nation that that's what we're going to do. We have to make that decision as a world. We heard from someone in Pakistan, from Pakistan at the prayer breakfast earlier, about how 40% of that country's been still underwater, and they have to choose to drink water that they've been warned has cholera in it. So are they going to die of thirst or contract cholera? And these kinds of cities, Nigeria, 1 million people just displaced last week. 2 days later, another 1 million people in Chad. We are building, as Abraham Lincoln said, the occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. That's where we are. I'm sorry to take time here. Armon, give us your response to this.
Yeah, let's see.
Question.
What makes the Gulf South unique? How do we strengthen our advocacy, and what is our vision? Well, I'm a little bit biased, born and raised here, 22 years all my life, and you know, besides the amazing food that we have here in the South and the amazing people, because let's be honest, the people here in the Gulf South, when we are met with extreme crises, when we are put in the worst positions possible, we stand up and we fight for each other time and time and time again. So that's what makes this region so special, is the fact that when we're put in the worst possible positions, we will link arms and continue to fight for each other. We will feed 5,000 people, as we've heard multiple times yesterday being said. And I think that's important when we look at the environmental injustices going on within the Gulf South. What's saddening is that these stories of, you know, folks being exploited in certain specific areas along the Gulf South states, is it's not just one particular area. It's happening all throughout our region. You know, one of the reasons why I started getting more involved in my advocacy work, I have a strong passion for policy and legislation and law. I started off, you know, really young. I was volunteering at the Texas State Aquarium, actually, where I was talking to folks about the marine species in our bay and our beaches, and I was connecting people to nature and our environment. So I was linking that connection with folks. And the more I started to realize, and we started talking about our conservation plans and hearing these staggering statistics about biodiversity loss. I went to university, studied water quality, I studied jellyfish science, and the statistics that we were finding and the research that we were finding became very staggeringly clear that if we don't do anything right now, either for biodiversity loss or climate change as a whole, we are going to enter a point of no return. And so, for me, I started to dive into, what are the ways that we can do this? Of course, we can do it by uniting each other. And I started to realize that a lot of these issues, whether it's from environmental agencies, because I think what's important here is something that you had mentioned. We have to address the systems in place. And that's why I love to talk about policy and law. But there's also in that power struggles as well. Who has the power to take away our rights? Who has the power to exploit us in that kind of paradigm? But so I addressed it through law and policy. So I went to university for science communications, and I really started to realize that in order for us to make really meaningful change, we have to put long-term policies in place, both for marine protections, but protect the sanctity of life living now. And so I started to study political science, and I started getting involved at the city level. I really believe that us as residents, we deserve seats at the table. And so when law and policy are being discussed about how we live our lives, how our water is protected, how our lands are protected, how our children remain safe, we have to be at those tables. And so I decided to start getting involved with some local boards and commissions, all being appointed, not running for office or anything, but nonetheless, you get involved in law and policy, and that way we can address these issues. And I think as usually being the youngest person in those rooms, I was always asked time and time again, how can we involve more young people in this work? And there was a short time at university when I was looking into engineering, and one of the classes I had took, there was something that we would come across. It was called relevance and necessity, one of these engineering pillars, relevance and necessity. When you've got an invention, you've got to look at the relevance and necessity. And there's a story that I like to tell about an inventor that was working with farm workers. He went out to one of the farms, and they were, well, quite frankly, they were making tequila. So they would go and, cut down the agave, and they would cut down the leaves of the plant to turn it into tequila. Well, anyways, so he saw that they were out there for long periods of time. And so what he did was create this invention that would make it faster for them to, so that they wouldn't be out there in the heat so long. And he presented this invention to them, and they said, well, sir, you didn't realize that we get paid by the hour. So we want to be out here longer so we can get paid more. And then I think that is important, and we should reflect on that when we're talking about environmental agencies or federal agencies wanting to step into communities that need this kind of help. If you're an environmental agency, if you're an agency or an organization that is looking to help people on the front lines, don't approach them with a solution to the problem if you even haven't asked them, sat down with them at the table. It's the same thing with young people. Don't provide a solution for young people. I think what myself and my best friend, my partner, Maggie, we founded the Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit just on this principle, that here within the Gulf South region, there isn't necessarily a platform for young professionals to get together, young environmentalists, to start raising our voice. We see a lot of work happening on the West Coast, on the East Coast, but here in the Gulf of Mexico, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of organizations that focus on educating young people, but there's not enough organizations, coalitions, or alliances that focus on elevating young professional voices. And so we founded, thank you, we founded the Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit to address those specific needs. We've got some members of our recently launched Youth Advisory Congress where they focus on advocacy, they focus on education and policy, because we really do believe that to address a lot of these issues, we need to make sure that we're strengthening long-term policies.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. So, as each of the four of you do your work, and bless you, thank you for what you're doing. There have to have been some times when you felt discouraged, or you felt down, and that's human. We all go through that. but for this group, I'd like you to share, how do you get out of that? What recharges your batteries, so to speak? How do you find something that's tried and true to get back in the fight and lift your spirits up? And I don't know who wants to go first on that. Susana, you look like you've had some experience with this.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely, because I've been on this earth for 70 years. And so for me, I never give up. What happens is I get angry. I get mad. I get frustrated. But you know what happens when you go through all of those changes? You get organized. You get organized, and you start to make the changes. And you find other people who are angry, mad, frustrated, and you join forces. Mm-hmm. That's what it does. All you need to do is start with you and one other person. And believe me, that will continue to grow. Mm. But I do want to touch on the things that we need to do or in order to keep this movement going. One is we must assist in developing students of color as leaders, scientists, advocates on issues related to environmental and climate justice policies, community resilience, adaptation, and other major climate topics, especially in the Gulf South. We must support institutions, organizations, and centers that build up decades of expertise of environmental justice. We must support grassroots organizations to position themselves to leverage new opportunities that emerge from environmental justice related to changes in federal policies. And we must educate our communities about false solutions to climate change. This is very, very important. So when you are also centered and balanced, I tell people, what's the best way to balance yourself? Take off your shoes. Go out and touch the earth. Yeah. Touch the earth. Touch the earth. Sit out there. Take in the sun. Breathe in the air. Drink some water. Those are all of the elements that sustain us. Without those elements, we're dead. We're dead.
But with them, we're alive.
With them, we are alive, and we have to protect them. We have to protect those elements. As an indigenous person of this continent, they used to say, oh, look at those natives honoring the sun, the earth, and they pray to the water and to the air. Guess what? We were so intelligent. So intelligent. Because we recognized right away that without those elements, we would not exist. And that is very, very important. And the other thing that keeps me going is spirituality. Spirituality is very important. Your belief, the power in the prayer, working with others is very important. I pray every morning and every night. That's very, very important to keep yourself balanced. Whatever your belief is very important to keep yourself balanced. And I'll tell you one other little thing. When you go into a room and there's a lot of hostility, you're in a meeting room, you're in a task force, don't be afraid to cleanse yourself and throw those negative energies out, because you don't want to carry them with you. You want the positive energies that you do. That is part of our indigenous ways, is recognizing what's in the room, who has those negative energies, and being able to cleanse themselves. And I'll close with this particular statement. First, I'll tell you one thing my dad always said. He said, Susana, I respect everyone. Everyone. He said, I don't care if they're black, brown, green, yellow. He says, respect or white. And I said, Dad, there's no green people. And he said, just in case they come. Just in case they come. So I'll close with this indigenous saying. There was a time when we were all sisters and brothers. The night sky our ceiling, the earth our mother, the sun our father, our parents our leaders, and justice their guy. On with that.
Thank you very much. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. When you mentioned the scenario of walking into a room and not being afraid of people who were there with you, I immediately flashed back when I was a little boy, 4 or 5 years old. My grandmother and grandfather lived in the house next door. They had a picture on the wall of Daniel in the lion's den. And it was one of these line drawings, and maybe there was an original painting and they just had a black and white copy of it. I don't know, but I used to stand there and look at that picture, and Daniel was looking up, and the sun was, the beam was, shaft of sunlight coming down through the prison window up above, and those lions were walking around. The expression on the lions' faces were, we better not eat him. Because he was a righteous man. And I think that when you walk into a room and you're worried about, you just get in touch with the righteousness of your cause, not pompously, but because you believe what you're doing is right, and that's going to see you through. But anyway, who wants to go next? Logan, Armon, Abre? Who?
Yeah, let's see. Well, let's be honest. I think, when we're dealing with this kind of work, of course it's going to be very heavy when we're talking about environmental injustices. What this work demands of us is to look within, to see the power struggles, to see the systems that have put us in this place, and we have to oftentimes unlearn these habits. We have to deconstruct the thoughts and the habits that we have as people, but also address our neighbors, address the people in power. And so, I always stress mental health. I mean, I think it's vitally important as activists in this kind of work that we are making sure that we do some self-love and some self-care. So you asked me, how do I do it? That's how I do it. For me, mental health, it's going outside, it's touching the grass, it's breathing in air. But like I said before, let's be honest. Going outside and breathing air and drinking water for some of us is a luxury and a privilege. There are communities in the Gulf South that can't go outside and just feel comfortable to breathe the air that they have out there, or to just drink the water if they don't have a bottle of water. And that's what should unite us, is the fact that we are not okay until we are all okay. And there was, I forgot the quote that someone said yesterday, but in my mind, I think it goes back to this fact that there are a lot of stark and dark realities that we have to face as humanity. Our history of capitalism, our history of the systems that have put us in here, and I mentioned that we have to prioritize mental health, and I just want to double down on that, because it's not easy to confront the terrible things that have put us in these positions. I don't want to go too deep into that, but I know, and we know, that this movement, it hasn't been primarily putting people of color in the front line. This movement isn't necessarily a majority of people of color, and we have to confront those issues so that we can move forward, not just one in front of the other, but together holistically. And I say that because I think, for my white friends, and for the white guilt that you may feel in terms of the environmental justice we see in putting people in color in the positions that they're in, with all due respect and all of the love in my heart, it's not about you and the white guilt. It is about addressing the issues that people of color have been put in, the systems that have put them in there, the oppression, the exploitation. And so we want you to work with us so that in the end, truthfully, we can work together, because in the end, we all manage to benefit so that we can make sure that we're all okay when we're all okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Abre, and then Logan. Yeah.
Well, each year I reread Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. And one of the reasons,
Give the title again.
A Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton.
Okay.
And yes, so for those of you all who have read it, and if you haven't, please do. One of the reasons that I read this book is to remind me that this work that we're doing is for the long haul. We're not necessarily going to see all of the successes within our lifetime, and that in order for us to truly have a more just future, we have to put our egos aside. We have to put the need for there being these short-term wins aside to understand that what we're building here is something that's going to take a long time for us to get to where we need to be. There were centuries that Black folks were in slavery, you know, and we're just getting to a place where we're even being able to acknowledge the impact of slavery on all facets of life, including environmental and climate issues in this country. And so when we think about revolutionary suicide, and again, this is why I read this book, is to remind me that, you know, there are individuals who've been fighting their entire life for us to even have a stage and a platform like this to talk about environmental and climate justice issues. I think about one of the individuals who I met in Jackson, Mississippi, who is a local historian, and he was sharing that he saw the disinvestment in Jackson for years. He has been documenting what has been happening in Jackson for years because he knew that there would finally be a time where they would be able to have the opportunity to share what's been happening. And so he was one of our complainants for our Title VI complaint that we filed with the EPA. The EPA recently opened our Title VI complaint. And so he got to actually see, after years and years of collecting information, knowing that at some point there would be an opportunity for him to actually demonstrate what he's known for years in a different kind of space. He shared that he was just so happy that he was able to share his story. He was able to share the discrimination that he knew he was facing with a federal entity who could now be able to make some different decisions. At the NAACP, we have a saying that we say, when we fight, we win. And I'm from the South, like I said. I grew up in a Black church, and so we do call and response in the Black church. And so when I say when we fight, I want to hear you all say we win. So when we fight,
we win.
When we fight,
We win.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. The second prayer service I've had this morning. Logan?
I might throw a little more prayer here. I would say the only thing that, or a way that I can center myself is to find some joy and celebration. There is so much work to be done, and it is draining mentally, it is draining physically, but those wins when we fight, when we see those victories, I got to tell you, I'm just going to tell the story. How many of you know about this fight that's been going on in Louisiana against Formosa?
Yeah.
Right? There's this song that I have heard Miss Sharon Levine and others sing over the years, Victory Is Mine. That is a song of celebration. And I got chills just thinking about it again. And the minute I heard, and I knew that this community, I knew that this state, I knew that this movement could kill that plant, but when the second I heard that plant, that the permit had been pulled, all I could think was victory is mine. All I could think was, it's time to celebrate. It's time to celebrate one another and one another's victories and the love that all of us put into this work. And so I'm always looking for, even if they're small victories, I'm always coming back to those songs of celebration, because we celebrate what we love and we protect what we love. And so really making sure that we don't let anybody forget that we're going to win. We keep on singing those songs of victory.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Thank you. So We have just a few minutes left, and so we'll go into the lightning round. Realizing that we've got 400 people here who are committed and really have taken the time to try to arm themselves with knowledge and new skills and information and hope and networking and all of that. You four have been in this fight. And I'm wondering if you could give one word of advice, one sentence of advice to these women and men who have gathered here in Houston. What would it be? We've heard some great advice already, so I don't want to minimize that, but we'll go Armon, and then we'll go right down the line, and we'll end with you.
All right.
Go ahead.
Mr. Gore, you said one word, one sentence. That's hard. Well, you know, I didn't take the opportunity earlier to say that the vision. I think what's really great about the opportunity that I had to be trained in Nevada was when you started the presentation, it really was the reality of the situation, all of this doom that is going on around the world. But then the second half of the presentation is, it doesn't have to be like this. There are solutions in place right now. The majority of the technology needed is created. It has already been invented. We just need to push the people in power to actually make action on those, and we can build that through grassroots organizing. And I think it's relevant because I want to just talk about the vision really fast. What we see in the future are leaders, if they're involved in policy, leading with compassion and dignity of the people that they are governing and representation. And that relies on us as a democracy to make sure that we are putting people in power, that are pushing people over profits, and making sure that we and our life is sanctified, that making sure that the people living here on this planet are being taken care of. So for me, it's always get out to vote, make sure that you're doing that. Whoever you're voting for, I'm not going to tell you to vote, who to vote for legally, but just getting out to vote. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. We know that in order to make some really nice change here, we need to put people in office that are going to do a better job of making sure that the environmental agencies, especially in a state like Texas, I'm not going to name any names, but environmental agencies, that when they appoint people to those agencies to overlook our lives, we are addressing those too. So get out to vote, and that's it.
All right, thank you. Logan?
All right.
It wasn't a sentence, but.
Wonderful.
Celebrate where you come from and find joy in it. And don't accept anything less than what we deserve. And what we deserve is to have a future in the Gulf South and to be proud of our home and to not sacrifice it. So fight for it.
There you go. Thank you very much. Good for you. Abre?
I think I will say, and also thanks to you, Mr. Gore, we have the internet and we have the ability to have the revolution now be not only televised, but our revolution will also be broadcasted all across the world. And for us to understand that our voices are power when it comes to thinking about the solutions that we want to see here in the Gulf South, the solutions that we want to see for environmental equity, justice, and a climate reality that will allow for all of us who have been historically excluded from these conversations to be centered moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Susana, bring us home. Bring us home.
Yeah, and I want to say that we have to remember equity and justice. And the most powerful power is people power. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget that. It is people power. That is the most important power. And then, sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede. Sí se puede.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to join me in expressing our thanks to Susana and Armon, Logan, and Abre. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll go out that way. Thank you so much.
I would also like to thank the panel one more time. One more round of applause for an amazing panel. Thank y'all. Lots of topics of conversation had just now, but the thing that is sitting with me is really about making the things that are very heavy as light as we can, so that we are carrying them together, but also so that we are taking care of ourselves while we are doing that work. You know, there is a certain amount of there is knowledge, there is attention, there is awareness of deep-seated roots of racism and exploitation that are endemic to this industry and to what we are fighting against, that have been known by the people experiencing for a very long time, for generations. It was never lost on the people being exploited that they were being exploited. And now that we are in this together and we are trying to build toward better solutions, one of the things that helps me make heavy things light is humor. So I appreciate that y'all are letting me bring that energy into this room today to make some jokes and to lighten our load today as we learn really how to do this well. So thank you all for that. It's one of the things my mom and dad up in Louisiana is, if you can't cry, laugh. Not sure that that was the healthiest thing in the whole world, but that's okay. So we are now going to actually break out in the first breakout session, which is very exciting. We are going to be doing some climate activism skill building. You have 5 minutes. How long do you have? 5 minutes. Excellent. To make a choice between one of 4 sessions. You can go to the session on empathy and resistance, which is going to be right here in the main ballroom. You can go to sustainable activism, which is going to be in Houston 5. You can go to the one on building intersectional coalitions against pollution, which is in Houston 6. Or you can go to youth voices about campus organizing in Houston 7. How long do you have to make that decision? 5 minutes. And if you're going to be here for the empathy and resistance, move toward the front. Don't be shy. Come to these front tables so you can really be part of the conversation. Don't move yet. I know you only have 5 minutes. Do make sure that you bring all your stuff with you. Don't leave your belongings in this room. If you need somewhere to store some things, you can do that in the Montgomery room, which is also somewhere on the 2nd floor, which is the floor we're on right now, I'm told. These sessions will be about an hour long, so you'll come back to this room at 11:30. And you need to make sure that you're on time, because we're running a tight ship here, y'all. So what time do you have to be back in this room? 11:30. All right, thank you all so much.